Hey good folks, Ran Ben Avraham here for CG Tuts, and welcome to lesson 9 of this tattoo gun tutorial. In the previous lesson, we've started building the texture for the tattoo gun. We've built the color section of it. In this lesson, we'll look into the bump, the diffuse, and the specular color. First, the bump. Let's start with the coil. We'll search for the tribal shape. I'll duplicate tribal black and drag it outside here and into the bump folder on top of the gray color, which we'll rename to base. Rename this to coil tribals. Double click on it to get the layer styles menu, and we'll use a color overlay. Not red, obviously, we need very light gray, almost white. The brighter it is, the higher the bump would be. We'll hit OK. I'll duplicate this one and hide the original one, and I would like to blur it a bit. So I'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. 2 should do the trick, maybe 3. 2 was fine. And that's it for the coils. So basically, in a bump map, we have two options, either to push in or push out. White would be to push out, and black would be to push in. Hence the reason for the neutral gray in the base layer. We've already pushed out the tribal shape here, and now we would like to push in, or to create nudges for the contact screw, as well as for the rear binding pose. So let's create a new layer. We'll start with creating a very large shape, and then we'll scale it down. I would like to trim out the edges here, so I'll get a triangled edge on both ends. It doesn't have to be perfect, it will be very small, so this should do the trick. Let's see, let's fill it with black color. Hit G and fill it. And now let's scale it down. This is approximately the area we want to cover horizontally from this point to this point. Okay, rename this to nudge base, duplicate it and hide it. We can actually scale this one a bit down. You know what, this is better, so let's get rid of this one. This will be the original nudge base, and let's duplicate it and hide the original. And now let's duplicate this one over and over, and we'll mark these two, duplicate those, and repeat that process over and over until we fill the entire segment. And at this point we can merge all of these together. So we'll mark all of them, hit Ctrl E, we'll call this contact screw head. Let's duplicate it and hide the original and try and soften it a bit by using the Gaussian blur. So blur, Gaussian blur. 1 might be a bit too much, let's say 0.5. That's a bit more like it. Okay. Now we need to repeat the process over here on the body up to this point. So let's duplicate this one. We'll place it in the middle, and this time around it needs to cover the whole body. So we'll scale those up, and we can duplicate these, merge these two layers. Now this is the contact screw body. Let's mark this section and get rid of it. And we can get rid of the sides as well. Even though we won't be seeing them, it just makes things a bit more clear. Let's pause here for a second and see how it looks on our model. There's our contact screw, and we'll need to switch to high quality to view the bump map. And the bump map is looking very well. Now obviously on the body it needs to be a spiral and not straight lines, but I don't think it will be that noticeable. And we need to do the same for the rear binding post. Let's duplicate this layer and we'll rename it to rear binding post. Switch over to the rear binding post. This is the area we want to add the nudges to. We'll drag it over here and rotate it to 90 degrees. And we can scale those up all the way, and we would need to trim that a bit later. And we need to duplicate that. And once again, let's merge all of these, and we can now get rid of the unnecessary parts. I would like to trim the edges in a feathered sort of way so the nudges would fade into nothing. So I'll set the feather to, let's try 5, see how that goes. We'll mark this section and delete it. And 5 actually works very nice for us, so we'll leave it as is. Do the same for the bottom. Okay, let's save it. Go back to Maya, update the BSD network. Again, go to texturing, update BSD network. Give it a few seconds, and there's our nudges fading out in the edges, which is looking very, very nice. Back to Photoshop. This is about it for the bump map. Next we have the diffuse. Again, in diffuse I would like to paint the background in a neutral gray. 128 would be the neutral gray. 128 on the RGB, that is. In the diffuse map we have the options to highlight or darken different parts of our model. I don't really have any parts I would like to darken, however I have parts I would like to highlight. Let's turn these off for a second. I would like to highlight the tribal shape here on the coil, no doubt. The blue parts of the wing nut fastener, as well as the yoke, and maybe even the tribal on the front spring. Let's open up the color folder, turn off the final image. Let's actually rename this one to final image, or just final. Let's take this tribal, duplicate it, we can close it now. We'll place it in our diffuse folder. We can actually use the coils from the bump. Let's see, the wing nut fastener. Duplicate it and place it in the diffuse folder. Okay, we can turn on now the bump and the diffuse. White will be very highlighted, black will be the exact opposite, very darkened. Let's actually just copy the color overlay we've got here. Right click, copy layer style, and we'll paste it to the front spring tribal shape. Right click, paste layer styles, and same goes for the wing nut fastener. Right click, paste layer style. And that's it for the diffuse. All we have left to do is deal with the specular color. Now again, in the specular color we are dealing with monochromatic map. The specular color map job is to define the surface shininess amount, basically how much it would be reflective. The darker the surface, the less reflection you've got. The brighter the surface, the more shininess you get on it. I would like most of this model to be very dim, but I would like some parts to be highlighted. So let's start by renaming this layer to base. We'll start with the Armature Bar. Let's mark the section of the Armature Bar. I would like it to be quite dark, so let's first create a new layer for it. Rename it to Armature Bar. Mark the section, and I'll choose quite a dark gray. Okay, and hit G and fill it. Next are the coils. We can actually copy the coils from here. Let's duplicate this shape here and drag it into our specular folder. It's a bit too dark. Let's hit Ctrl U and just make it a bit brighter. I want it to be a bit more bright than the Armature Bar. It needs to be a bit more reflective, nothing too drastic. Something of this sort should be fine. This is the Coils body, and we need to add the tribal. We can copy that from the Diffuse folder, and I would like it to be completely black. Okay, let's rename this to just Coils tribals. And we have also got the Coils sides. Now those parts need to have a very high specularity. So again, let's copy those from the color map. Place it in the specular color. It might be a bit too bright. Let's hit Ctrl U and I'll darken it a bit. Even though it needs to have relatively high specularity, I still don't want the whole thing to have too much of a high specular. Create a new folder for it, and we'll call this Coils. Place these three inside. Now with the Coils edges, I've got the capacitor body still selected with it, which is a mistake undragging from the color map. I do need it to be the same color, so I'll just leave those as is. Another high specularity part is the tube over here. So again, let's copy the tube from the color map and place it in the specular folder. Let's hit Ctrl U and darken it a bit. It's a bit more highlighted than the coil sides, but again, not that highlighted. Now, I would like to copy the grunge we've got from the frame. Let's turn off for a second the specular color, the diffuse, and the bump, and focus on the frame here. In the color section, that is. Let's see, frame. Okay, open that up. Let's turn off the tribals for a second. Okay, this is the one. This is the layer without the tribals connected to it. So I'll duplicate this layer and let's bring things here back to their original state. And we'll drag the duplicate to the specular folder. First, we've got a lot of leftovers here on the side, which I would like to get rid of. So let's do that real quick. This whole section is really unnecessary, and we can delete this part. And I would also delete the sides here. Okay, and I am only interested in the scratches, the grunge texture we created here. At the moment, we've got specular highlight on the grunge and no specular highlight on the edges, and I need it to be the other way around. Rename this one to frame sides, duplicate this one, and duplicate it again, and I'll keep the original one for reference. The second duplicate I'll invert, so I'll hit Ctrl I, and I'll set the second duplicate transfer mode to screen. Now, it doesn't seem to make any difference, but the difference here is that before we had, instead of black, just alpha channel. And if I would try to darken this layer without the black behind I've got right now, I will get actually no result. Let's run a quick test for that. I'll switch that back to normal and get rid of the background. Almost no change, right? Now, if I'll go to Image, Adjustments, Curves, and I'll try to darken this image, I will get no result whatsoever. But let's switch this one back to screen and reintroduce the first duplicate. We'll merge these two together, and now we'll go to Image, Adjustments, Curves. Now we have some color information to work with here. We can darken this one out, and now we've got a lot more contrast here. And if we'll hit Ctrl U, we can darken the whole thing until the sides are more or less matching the base color. We need to repeat the same process for the frame sides. My bad. This isn't the frame sides, this is the frame strip, and we do need to repeat the same process for the frame sides. So let's see. we'll just duplicate the last layer here and bring that inside our Specular Color folder. Turn it back on. Now this is the frame sides. This time around we've got the black color in the background as well, so we don't have any alpha information here, so we don't need to go through all that process. However, we first need to get rid of the unnecessary information here, which is the strip and the rest of the stuff here which we don't really need. And again we'll repeat the same process. We'll duplicate this layer, hide the original, duplicate it again, we'll invert this layer and merge these together. We'll go to Image, Adjustments, Curves, and darken it. Something of this sort should be fine, and we can hit Ctrl U and darken it again until we get something that we like. Now let's create a new folder for this one. We'll call this one Frame and place it inside. And we need to repeat the very same process for the rear spring and for the grip. So I'll go ahead and pause the recording, do that real quick, and we'll continue on from that point on. Next we've got the contact screw, and for that we have a similar process to go through. We'll again drop to our color folder into the contact screw. Let's shut down the eyes here so you can see what's going on. So we'll duplicate the contact screw folder and we can close these now, and we'll drop the contact screw copy into our Specular Color folder. We can turn on the eyes here and let's see. First we can merge these two together. Let's rename this to contact screw minus the copy. Hit Ctrl U and get rid of all the saturation, i.e. turn it to monochromatic or black and white. Okay, we can zoom in here so we can see what's going on. And for a few seconds we'll get rid of the UV snapshot. I'll duplicate this one and hide the original. And I'll hit Ctrl I to invert. And next I would like to go to Image, Adjustments, Curves. What I would like to do here is to leave all the white parts and get rid of all the black. Next I'll switch the transfer mode to Lighten or Screen. Screen actually gives me a lot more information here, so I'll stick with Screen. The white parts here will have a very high specularity, and the gray parts showing through will have a lot less specularity. Might need to set the opacity to be a bit lower, let's say 80. Okay, let's bring back the UV snapshot. And that's just about it for the Specular Color, which means that's just about it for the entire PSD texture file. So, before I close things up here, there's one more thing I would like to do. I'll go to each folder and mark all the layers, duplicate them, and merge the duplicates. That is important because the transfer modes don't show in Maya. Let's do the same for the diffuse. Duplicate all these layers, merge them, and for the bump, duplicate all of these, merge them, and we've got the final image here, and we can actually rename all those to final as well. Okay, save the image and let's switch to Maya. Here we are back in Maya, and we've got two more materials I would like to create, and those materials are for the quartz and O-ring and for the rubbers. Let's bring back our hypershade, and in mental array we'll create Maya X Materials Passes. Let's double click on it and we'll rename it to rubbers, and we'll go to presets and choose rubber replace. Now this solid rubber material is designed more for wheels solid rubber. It should work fine for us, only we need to change the color to something more of an office rubber type of color. Let's mark the two rubbers and we'll go to Assign Existing Materials, Rubbers. It doesn't seem as if the material applied here, so we'll switch off from the high quality. And let's see, let's bring back the hypershade. We'll create another Maya Material X passes, and we'll call this one Chords, and we'll mark the 3 chords and the O ring. Right click, Assign Existing Materials, Chords, and let's see. I would like to set the color to black and the reflection color to dark blue on the edge of purple, something like this. We'll set the reflectivity to 1 and the glossiness to 0.350, and we'll set the glossy samples to 0. And practically that's it for our tattoo gun. But I would like to test it. So let's right click on the attribute editor here where you got the dotted line, and we'll bring back the status line. We'll open up the render settings window. Let's apply a few basic settings here. First, the image size. I would use HD 720 for the time being. We'll make sure the default lights aren't enabled. And I'm using an EXR, enabling color management, sRGB for the default input and output profiles. In the quality tab, the map samples is set to 2, which is fine. Anti-aliasing is 0.075. Multi-pixel filtering is set to Mitchell. In the frame buffer, I'm rendering 32 bits. And let's see, I want to create an image-based lighting to light up my scene. I'm going to use an HDR image I've got here, a blurred one. I'm using Final Gather, which is accuracy is set to 500. Last, I would like to make sure that the image-based lighting isn't seen in the final render, so I'll toggle down the render stats and shut off primary visibility. Let's mark View, Camera Settings, Resolution Gate, just to make sure what is being rendered here. Okay, now let's run a quick test render and see how this looks. And this is the result I've got. And as you can see, it's nothing too nice. So what I did, I went back into Photoshop and I duplicated the final result and just hit Ctrl U and brought up the lightness a bit until I got something a bit lighter, something of this sort. Render it again. As you can see, the result is a bit nicer. We get a bit more specularity on the shiny parts, but still it's pretty dark. So I went again to Photoshop, and this time I duplicated the final result, and again I've lightened it a bit with the hue and saturation, and I also added the tube and the coils silver parts and painted them white. And this is the result I've got, which is, as you can see, a lot better. But still, this isn't the render I'm after. So I went ahead and created a backdrop, which is basically a plane extruded on one side, 2 more divisions added here, and then I just hit 3 on the keyboard to switch it to the smooth view. And I've added 2 lights into the scene, just basic area lights which I scaled up. Their parameters are at the original state, I haven't changed anything about them. I've also made sure that the primary visibility for the backdrop is disabled, and then I went ahead and rendered it again. And now, as you can see, we can really spot the details here. We can really see all the fine texturing we did here. Now, the chords are too purple for my taste. Let's zoom in here. I would actually take out some of that purple and maybe some of the saturation here. Well, good folks, that's just about it for the tattoo gun tutorial. But before I say goodbye, I would like to tell you about my new Maya and After Effects 10-part course I recently published via CMI VFX. Autodesk Maya Rapid Premiere is its title, and throughout the course, step by step, I'll guide you through building complex shaders, using different deformers, writing and reading Maya expressions, lighting, and animating with a variety of different tools and combinations. Later on in After Effects, we'll take an in-depth look on compositing multiple render passes, advanced color correction, depth of field, particles, all those good stuff that completes this happy spring scene. For more information, and to buy some or all these course chapters, drop by this address right here. And don't forget to drop by my Facebook page to learn more on my upcoming tutorials and download some free stuff. Folks, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time and watching this tutorial series. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, my name is Ran Ben Avraham, and I'll see you next time.